Have you ever stood in the middle of a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, mop in hand, watching doctors rush past you like you're part of the wall, and thought, this is not my life? This cannot be my life? That was me, every single night, for 11 months. My name is not important right now. What matters is what happened to me, what was done to me, and how the woman who smiled at my father's funeral while secretly draining every dollar he left me eventually sat across from a lawyer who made her hands shake. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand what I lost before you can understand what I got back. My father was not a flashy man. He drove the same pickup truck for 14 years, wore the same brand of work boots until the soles wore through, and packed his lunch every single day of his working life. He was a civil engineer. Careful, methodical, precise. He spent 31 years building things that lasted. And he spent those same years quietly building something for me, a life insurance policy worth $200,000, a savings account with just over $40,000, and a small piece of land in eastern Tennessee that had been in his family for 3 generations. He told me about all of it when I turned 21, sat me down at the kitchen table, slid a folder across to me, and said, "This is your foundation, sweetheart. Whatever happens to me, you will never be starting from zero." He died of a heart attack 18 months later. He was 54 years old. He was standing in the backyard feeding the birds he loved, and he was gone before the ambulance arrived. I was 23. My stepmother had been in the picture for 6 years by then. She and my father married when I was 17, and I want to be fair, she was not cruel to me. She was simply indifferent in that particular way some people are, where they are never outright mean, but they make it clear, in 100 small ways, that you are not truly part of what they consider theirs. Her daughter from her first marriage, who was a year younger than me, had a bedroom that got redecorated twice. Mine had the same curtains from when I was 12. But my father loved her. That was real. I never doubted that. And so I kept my discomfort to myself, went to college 2 states away, called my father every Sunday, and told myself that once I graduated and built my own life, the distance would feel natural rather than necessary. I graduated with a degree in environmental science the spring before he died. I came home for the summer. I was job hunting, sending out applications, staying in my old bedroom. My father and I had dinner together 3 times that week. He seemed tired but happy. He talked about maybe retiring early, taking a road trip, seeing the national parks he had always wanted to visit. Then he was gone. The funeral was on a Thursday. My stepmother wore black and accepted condolences with a kind of practiced grace that I found unsettling even then, though I told myself I was being uncharitable. Grief looks different on different people. I knew that. My father's brother, my uncle, who lived in Atlanta and whom I had always adored, flew in for the service. He and my stepmother had never been warm with each other. I watched them speak briefly near the reception table, a conversation that lasted less than 2 minutes before my stepmother turned away. My uncle caught my eye across the room and gave me a look I didn't fully understand at the time, something sad and worried, directed specifically at me. I didn't get a chance to speak with him privately. My stepmother kept the day moving, kept people circulating, kept me close in a way that felt more like management than comfort. 3 weeks after the funeral, she sat me down. She was very calm, very reasonable sounding. She explained that the house had a mortgage my father had not told me about, which I later discovered was partially true but wildly exaggerated. She explained that finances were extremely tight. She explained that she thought it would be best if I found my own place, given that her daughter was going to be moving back home and would need my room. When I asked about the life insurance, she told me it had gone entirely to covering the mortgage arrears and funeral costs. When I asked about my father's savings account, she paused for just a half second too long and said she wasn't sure what I was referring to. When I asked about the land in Tennessee, she said my father had sold it 2 years prior to help pay for my college tuition. I sat there and I nodded. I was 23 years old and I had just buried my father and the ground was still moving under my feet, and I nodded, and I thanked her, and I went upstairs and I packed my things. I had $4,000 in my own checking account, a 7-year-old Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it, a degree that had not yet gotten me a single interview, and nowhere to go. I could not tell you exactly when I realized she was lying. It happened in pieces, over weeks. A comment from a college friend whose father had also passed, comparing notes on the insurance process, that made me realize the timeline my stepmother had described was not how any of it worked. A phone call with my father's accountant, whom I found by going through old files in a box I had kept, who was very careful with his words but who confirmed that yes, there had been a savings account, and yes, it had been substantial, and that he had not been involved in any of the transactions that had apparently occurred after my father's passing. The land. I looked up property records online at a public library because I was sleeping in my car by then and did not have a reliable internet connection. The land in eastern Tennessee was not sold 2 years prior. The land had been transferred out of my father's name 4 months before he died, into a limited liability company I had never heard of. The registered agent of that company was my stepsister. She was 22 years old, and she was the registered agent of a company that held my family's land. I sat in that library for a long time. I want to be honest with you about those months, because I think people sometimes tell this part of their story in a way that makes them sound braver than they felt. I was not brave. I was exhausted, and I was grieving, and I was deeply, profoundly humiliated. Sleeping in your car in the parking lot of a 24-hour gym so you can use their showers in the morning is not something you tell people. Eating gas station food and rationing it carefully because you have no refrigeration is not something you describe at job interviews when they ask how you've been spending your time since graduation. I got 2 jobs: a day shift stocking shelves at a grocery store and a night shift doing environmental services at a regional hospital, which is the formal way of saying I cleaned patient rooms and hallways and waiting areas between the hours of 10 at night and 6 in the morning. I chose the night shift deliberately. It paid $1.50 more per hour. The parking lot was well lit and monitored by security cameras, and the security guard on overnight rotation, a retired police officer named Marcus, knew I was sleeping in my car within the first month and never said a word to management, but always made sure to swing past my parking spot on his rounds. There are good people in the world. I want to say that clearly. In the hardest year of my life, I was surrounded by more genuine kindness from coworkers and strangers than I had ever received from the woman my father chose to marry. I was saving money as fast as I could. After 6 months, I had enough for a deposit and first month's rent on a studio apartment, but I kept hesitating, kept thinking I should save more, kept being afraid that something would go wrong and I'd lose the buffer. Poverty, even temporary, even self-aware poverty, does something to the way you think about security. You can know, intellectually, that you have enough. Your nervous system doesn't believe you. I had also not done anything about what I knew. About the insurance money, the savings account, the land transfer. I had the documentation. I had printed the property records, kept the accountant's number, written down everything the college friend had told me. It sat in a folder in the trunk of my car under my spare tire for 9 months. I was afraid. I want to say that plainly, too. I was 23 and then 24 years old. I had no money for a lawyer. I wasn't sure what I could actually prove. And every time I thought about beginning some kind of legal process, I thought about sitting across from my stepmother in a courtroom, about her daughter who had apparently been building a paper trail since before my father died, about how all of that had been planned, and I was reacting without a plan of my own. So I cleaned hospital hallways at 2 in the morning, and I stocked grocery shelves at 9 in the morning, and I slept in my car, and I waited for something I couldn't name. The night my uncle came into the hospital, it was a Tuesday in early November. Cold. I was working the 3rd floor, the general surgery recovery wing, methodical and quiet the way you have to be when patients are sleeping 10 feet away, wheels on my cart, everything slow and deliberate. He was in the family waiting area down the hall. His wife had gone in for emergency gallbladder surgery that evening, and he had driven 4 hours and was sitting under fluorescent lights in a plastic chair, looking the way people look when they've been afraid for several hours and the fear has curdled into exhaustion. I almost didn't recognize him. It had been almost 2 years since the funeral, and the only other times I had seen him as an adult were holidays and occasional visits when my father was alive. But he looked up when my cart rattled slightly going past the doorway, and I glanced in automatically, and we made eye contact. He stared at me for a moment. I watched him piece it together, the uniform, the cart, the hour, the setting, and something moved across his face that I recognized even from the doorway. It was the same look he had given me across the reception room at my father's funeral. "Sweetheart," he said. Just that. I stopped walking. He came to the doorway. He looked at my uniform, at the cart, at me. He asked what I was doing there. I said I worked there. He asked since when. I said almost a year. He asked where I was living. There was a pause that lasted long enough to answer his question without words, and he closed his eyes briefly. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, "for months. Your number was disconnected. I had gotten a prepaid phone to save money. I hadn't thought about the fact that no one who had previously known my number could reach me." We didn't have a long conversation that night. His wife was in surgery, and I was working, and neither of us was in a condition for the full story. But before my shift ended, he had my new number written on the back of a hospital pamphlet, and he had said, in a voice that did not leave room for argument, "Don't do anything yet. Just wait until I call you." He called me the following Saturday morning. He had already, in the intervening 4 days, spoken to his own attorney, pulled every piece of public record he could find related to my father's estate, and apparently contacted the accountant I had spoken to months earlier, who confirmed the same things he had told me. My uncle is a wealthy man. I do not mean comfortable or well off. I mean that he built a commercial real estate business over 30 years that now operates in 6 states, and that when he says he is going to hire the best estate litigation attorney in the region, he means it the same way my father meant things, quietly, precisely, and without exaggeration. He met me for coffee on a Saturday morning at a diner halfway between Atlanta and where I was living at the time. He brought his attorney with him. Her name was Patricia. She was in her mid-50s, and she had the particular energy of someone who has spent decades in rooms where people try to lie to her and has stopped finding it interesting. She had already reviewed the documents I had saved. My uncle had asked me to photograph everything and send it to him. She set her coffee down, folded her hands on the table, and said, "What was done to you is called undue enrichment through fraudulent misrepresentation of estate assets and potentially elder financial exploitation depending on what we find about the timing of certain transactions relative to your father's diagnosis." I asked what that last part meant. She explained that in reviewing my father's medical records, which my uncle, as next of kin, had been able to request, it appeared my father had a cardiac event significant enough to require a specialist referral approximately 7 months before he died. The land transfer occurred 5 months before he died. The question of whether my father had fully understood what he was signing, given his documented cardiac history and the medications involved, was, in Patricia's words, worth examining very carefully. My stepmother had not counted on my uncle. That became clear as the process unfolded over the following months. She had counted on me being young, grieving, financially unstable, and isolated. She had counted on the distance between my uncle and my father, which she had cultivated deliberately over the years of their marriage, steering my father away from his brother with small comments and manufactured conflicts, keeping him out of the picture. She had counted on the accountant being bound by privacy and not volunteering information. She had not counted on any of us finding each other. The legal process was not fast. I want to be accurate about that rather than compressing it into something cleaner than it was. There were depositions and document requests and a period of approximately 3 months where I was told not to discuss any of it, which was its own particular torture. My stepsister hired her own attorney, a decision that turned out to accelerate everything rather than slow it down, because her attorney's strategy of aggressive denial created a paper trail of contradictions that Patricia later described as a gift. During those months, my uncle paid for a furnished apartment for me. He was matter-of-fact about it in a way that made it easier to accept not charity, he said, but a loan that would be repaid from the settlement, and he wanted a receipt. We both knew the receipt was a fiction designed to preserve my dignity, but I appreciated the fiction. I kept my job at the hospital. Marcus, the security guard, noticed I was no longer in the parking lot in the mornings and gave me a nod on my first shift back after the apartment that conveyed everything without saying anything. I also kept the grocery store job for the first 2 months, then let it go when the deposition schedule made it impossible. My stepsister's company, the one holding my family's land, was dissolved by court order 8 months after Patricia filed the initial complaint. The property was returned to my father's estate, which flowed directly to me as his only biological child and the named beneficiary on the original documents. The life insurance. Here is what had actually happened. My father's policy was worth $200,000. My stepmother had filed the claim as the surviving spouse. She was listed as primary beneficiary, which was her legal right under the policy as it was written. What was not her legal right was the existence of a separate beneficiary designation my father had made 4 years prior, naming me 50% of the policy proceeds which she had never disclosed and had not paid out. Patricia found it in the insurance company's records. The insurance company, faced with the documentation and a fairly pointed letter, issued a check, $100,000, plus interest for the period it had been wrongfully withheld. The savings account was harder to trace because some of the withdrawals had occurred before my father's death, and my stepmother had a plausible, if thin, explanation for each one. Patricia recovered 60% of it, $26,000, through the settlement negotiation. The rest, she told me, we could pursue further, but the cost-benefit was unfavorable given what we had already recovered. I agreed with her assessment. My stepmother did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters for this story to be true rather than satisfying. What happened was a civil settlement, a consent order, a payment schedule, and a set of restrictions that her attorney had negotiated down from what Patricia originally sought. She sold the house my father's mortgage had paid for to fund the settlement. She and my stepsister moved into an apartment on the other side of the city. Is that justice? I have thought about this question more than I can tell you. It is not the clean resolution I imagined in the hospital parking lot at 2 a.m, but I have my father's land back. I have the insurance money he intended for me. I have my uncle, who calls me every Sunday now the way my father used to, and whose wife has recovered well, and who has started teaching me things about building something that lasts: property, equity, patience. My stepsister called me once, 6 weeks after the settlement. She left a voicemail. I have listened to it 3 times. She did not apologize, she explained. There is a difference. I saved the voicemail not because I intend to respond to it, but because I think someday I will need to remember that people can do wrong things and still not understand that they did wrong things, and that this is not my problem to solve. My uncle stood in the parking lot of that diner after our first meeting, watching me walk to my car, the same Honda Civic, still running, 140,000 miles by then, and he said something I have carried with me since. He said, "Your father knew what he was building. He just didn't know who was going to need to protect it." I think about that a lot. I think about the folder under the spare tire that I kept for 9 months without opening. I think about how close I came to never opening it. About how the exhaustion of surviving can make you stop believing that anything beyond survival is available to you. Here is what I know now that I did not know at 23. Institutions, insurance companies, property records, accounting firms, court systems are not designed to protect the grieving. They are not designed to find the truth on your behalf. But they contain the truth. The documents exist. The records exist. The trails exist. And if you can find the right person to read them, a person with the standing, the resources, and the will to ask the questions, the truth does not disappear just because someone needed it to. My father spent 31 years building something careful and precise. He built it for me. It took 1.5 years, and my father's brother and a lawyer who drinks her coffee black and a retired police officer who never once asked why I was sleeping in his parking lot, but I have it back. Every last piece of it.